Super Auto Pets might seem like a simple game, but not all of its mechanics are apparent when you first start playing. Sure, you already know the basics, like how combining units upgrades their stats, but maybe you want to know exactly by how much. Or you've seen units with effects that activate when the round starts, but wondered if there was a specific turn order, or if everything was randomized. In this video, we'll try to answer all of your questions about the mechanics of Super Auto Pets. But first, we'll cover some of the basics in case you're still new to the game. The one thing that confused me the most when starting out was figuring out which buffs were permanent and which were temporary. The answer is simple. Buffs and other status effects that happen in combat stays in combat. This means that they are temporary buffs. However, if a buff or an effect is applied outside of combat, then it is permanent. For example, when your ant faints in combat, the buff from the ant is temporary, as in it only lasts until the end of combat. But if you were to use a sleeping pill to make it faint outside of combat, then the buff you get will be permanent. The same logic applies to all other faint and trigger effects, such as otters, dogs, you name it. There are some exceptions. For example, the horse can buff newly summoned units outside of combat, but only temporarily. But don't worry, these exceptions will always be clearly stated in the text, and so there should be no confusion about which effects are temporary and which are not. Another basic mechanic that we should look at is the money system. To be clear, unlike other auto battlers like auto chess or TFT, gold does not transfer between rounds, so spend it all or lose it. You get 10 gold a turn by default, and a swan on your team can help you get more. As for prices, everything in the shop costs 3 gold. It doesn't matter what tier your animals are, they all cost 3 gold. The dice next to the animal represent their tier and has no bearing on the cost. This also applies to items. The only exception is the sleeping pill, which only costs 1 gold. Rerolling for new animals and items always costs 1 gold. Selling animals is a bit more complicated than buying, but still very easy to understand. When you sell an animal, you get gold back equal to the level of the animal. So a level 1 animal will refund 1 gold when sold, and a level 3 animal will refund 3 whole gold, allowing you to buy a replacement straight away. Again, animal tier has no effect on how much they sell for. Speaking of the tier system, let's also go over how it works. As you know, animals are ranked according to tier. At turn 1, only tier 1 units are available in the shop. Every 2 turns, a new tier of animals become available. So at turn 3, tier 2 animals start appearing in the shop, and at turn 5, tier 3 animals appear, and so on, all the way until turn 11, where tier 6 animals will spawn. Tier 6 is the highest tier, and so all animals will appear in the shop from turn 11 onwards. As far as I know, the probability of drawing animals from each tier is equal, so on turn 11, your likelihood of rolling a tier 1 animal is the same as rolling a tier 6. This means it's much easier to build a level 3 tier 1 animal than it is to build a tier 6, because in the earlier turns only tier 1s are available, whereas in the late game you may not find many tier 6s, because all the other tiers are diluting the pool of animal spawns. The same applies to items, which are also tiered from 1 to 6. You might have also noticed that there is a way to get an animal of a higher tier than what is available to you in the shop. If you level up an animal, you'll be offered a random animal from 1 tier higher. For example, on turn 3 you will have just unlocked tier 2 animals, but if you leveled an animal up, you would be offered a random tier 3 animal, potentially giving you a power spike. This means it can sometimes be a good idea to wait until odd numbered turns to level up an animal, so you can get the most value out of your tier upgrades. At turn 9 and above, leveling an animal will always give you the highest tier animal, tier 6. Just make sure that you have space in your shop for it. Another question that I often hear is, what counts as a summon? Certain effects, such as the dog's ability, only activates when animals are summoned. Anytime a new animal is spawned on your board, it counts as a summon. So, for example, when you buy an animal on an empty spot, or when a sheep or a spider dies and spawns another animal, both within and outside combat. This means that if you use the sleeping pill on a sheep, you'd actually get 2 buffs for your dog, provided you have the space for it. And then you can sell both rams. Pretty neat. But remember that combining an animal directly from the shop is not a summon. So if you have a dog, if possible, summon an animal on an empty space before combining it, and you'll be on your way to having your very own Clifford. Okay, so now that we've covered the basic stuff, let's get into the deeper mechanics. Let's talk about how stats work. When you combine two animals, you take the higher attack of the two animals and add 1. That's your new attack value. Health works the same way. You pick the higher health from the two and add 1 to it. This means that in most situations, if you have multiple of the same type of animal, you should put all your buffs on a single animal. That way, when you combine them eventually, you don't lose any stats. Well, that's the simple version at least, because let's see what happens when we combine two animals that have 2 experience each. As you can see, not only did it pick the higher attack of the two, it also added 2 to it. So actually, the resulting stat when combining two animals is the higher stat of the two, plus the lower EXP of the two. This works exactly the same when combining animals directly from the shop. This could be a good way to buff a weak animal on the board, if you've had a few canned foods. Speaking of food, what happens to the food when an animal is combined with another one? Well, if only one animal has food and the other doesn't, then the food is transferred after combining, just as you'd expect. It doesn't matter which animal you drag into which, the result will be the same. The same cannot be said if both animals have food though. If both animals have food for some reason, and you combine them, the animal being dragged will lose its food. Or, in other words, the animal that's receiving the upgrade will retain the food. Another thing to understand when combining animals is that the experience is added together. This means, since it takes 3 animals to get to level 2, and 6 animals in total to get to level 3, you can combine 2 level 2s and it will become a level 3. Experience is not wasted when combining animals. Unless you go over 6, of course. Another tip about stats is that you can tell the difference between temporary stats and permanent stats. If an animal has been buffed temporarily, you can tell because there will be an underline beneath the stat. This means that the stats there will only last until the end of combat. Each animal has a base stat and an until end of combat stat. And when combining two animals, only the higher until of end of combat stat is kept. As you can see in this situation, both dodos have a baseline stat of 1-3. But the dodo on the right has a temporary buff from the horse for 2 damage, and the dodo on the left has a temporary buff of 3 damage. Let's see what happens when we combine them. The resulting dodo has an attack of 5, because it has a base stat of 2 and a temporary buff of 3 attack. The temporary buff of the 2 dodos are not combined. Instead, only the higher of the 2 is taken. Alright guys, and finally we get to the topic of animal turn order. Ever had your deer sniped by the enemy's dolphin just before your whale eats it? Well, don't blame RNG for that, because turn order is actually determined by the animal's attack. The animal with the highest attack will activate their ability first, followed by the animal with the second highest attack, and so on. You can also use this trick to make sure that your crabs are always buffing each other in the right order. Alright guys, that about covers it for this video. Hopefully this information will help you guys understand the game better, and become a better Super Auto Pets player. There are still a few more mechanics that aren't covered in this video, but I wanted to stick to the mechanics that are most commonly used. Let me know in the comments if I missed something that you would like to see covered, and subscribe if you want to see more Super Auto Pets content. I stream the game on YouTube and Twitch, and I'll be putting out more videos in the future. Till then, thanks for watching.